First contact with the Nexary. The Helios Deep Space Research Station hung like a silver pendant against the velvet backdrop of space, its massive solar arrays drinking in the light of twin suns. Inside, Dr. Samira Hassan stood before the observation window, her dark eyes fixed on the streaking lights of incoming vessels. After 15 years of human space exploration, first contact with truly dangerous predatory species was imminent. Dr. Hassan to Medical Bay 1. The station's AI chimed overhead. Priority alert. Samira's heart quickened as she hurried through the station's curved corridors. The message could only mean one thing. The Nexary delegation had arrived. Known throughout the galaxy as apex predators evolved from pack-hunting carnivores, the Nexary were as feared as they were respected. The medical bay doors parted with a soft hiss. Inside, a massive figure lay on the reinforced examination table. The Nexary warrior was easily 3 meters tall, covered in iridescent scales that shifted between deep purple and midnight blue. But what caught Samira's attention wasn't the warrior's imposing size or the wicked claws that could tear through reinforced steel. It was the tiny bundle clutched protectively against their chest. Status report, Samira demanded, already pulling on protective gear. Nexary shuttle suffered critical system failure during docking, Lieutenant Rivera explained, keeping his distance from the injured alien. Warriors refused medical treatment until you specifically were called. They've heard of your work with the Zirtaki young. Samira approached slowly, hands raised in a universal gesture of peace. The Nexary's silver eyes tracked her movement, pupils contracting to slits. A low rumble emanated from their chest. Not quite a growl, but a clear warning. I'm Dr. Hassan, she said softly. I understand you're injured. Will you allow me to help? The Nexary's gaze flicked between Samira and the bundle they protected. With agonizing slowness, they shifted their arms, revealing a Nexary cub no larger than a human infant. Unlike the adult's royal coloring, the cub's scales were pale, almost translucent. Protect, hatchling, the Nexary managed through their translation device. Mother, dead in crash. Guardian. Samira's medical scanner revealed the Guardian's injuries: internal bleeding, fractured ribs, severe concussion. The cub appeared physically unharmed, but was showing signs of extreme stress. Your injuries are severe, Samira said, maintaining eye contact. The cub is safe, but they're responding to your distress. Let me treat you both. For several tense heartbeats, the Nexary remained still. Then, with great effort, they extended their arms, offering the cub to Samira. The entire medical team held their breath. Never in recorded history had a Nexary willingly handed their young to another species. Samira cradled the cub with practiced care, supporting their delicate neck. The tiny creature chirred softly, their scales warming from glacial blue to a peaceful aqua. The Guardian's posture relaxed fractionally. Lieutenant, prepare surgical bay 3, Samira ordered, never taking her eyes off the cub. And bring me the thermal incubator from xenobiology. We'll need to maintain proper temperature regulation for both patients. Over the next 6 hours, Samira worked tirelessly to save the Guardian's life while keeping the cub calm and stable. She spoke constantly to both patients, explaining every procedure, every medication. The cub remained surprisingly calm in her presence, occasionally reaching out with tiny claws to touch her face mask. When the Guardian finally regained consciousness, they found their cub sleeping peacefully in a modified incubator beside their bed, Samira keeping vigilant watch over both. You did not separate us, the Guardian observed, their translator struggling with the complex emotions in their voice. Of course not, Samira replied. Nexary cubs need constant contact with their guardians. Separation would have caused unnecessary trauma to you both. The Guardian was silent for a long moment. I am called Vorkath, they finally said. My sister's cub is named Zyra. You have earned the right to know our names. Samira recognized the gravity of this gift. Names were sacred to the Nexary, shared only with those considered part of their extended pack. Thank you for trusting me with your care, she replied formally, and for allowing me to help Zyra. Trust, Vorkath rumbled thoughtfully, not given lightly by my kind. Must be earned. Perhaps humans are not as weak as we believed. As if in response, Zyra stirred in their sleep, tiny claws reaching out. Without hesitation, Samira adjusted the incubator, allowing the cub to grasp both their guardian's finger and her own. Word of the incident spread quickly through the station. Within days, other Nexari warriors arrived, each watching Samira's interactions with Vorkath and Zyra with intense interest. Some brought their own cubs, asking questions about human medical techniques and child-rearing practices. A bridge had been built, not through shows of force or complex diplomacy, but through the simple act of caring for a child in need. It was a small step, but perhaps it was enough to begin changing centuries of interspecies mistrust. As Samira watched Zyra take their first wobbly steps between herself and Vorkath weeks later, she realized that sometimes the strongest bonds were forged not in the heat of battle, but in the quiet moments of healing and growth. Humanity had made its first real connection with the Nexari, not through strength of arms, but through strength of heart. The trial of trust. News of the Helios Station incident reached the Nexari homeworld within days. The High Council of Elders, a group of ancient warriors whose scales had faded to sterling silver with age, convened an emergency session. Never before had a Nexari warrior willingly surrendered a cub to an alien species' care. The implications were both intriguing and disturbing. 3 weeks after treating Vorkath and Zyra, Dr. Samira Hassan found herself standing before the council in their orbital chamber above Nexar Prime. The circular room's transparent floors revealed the swirling storms of the gas giant below, a reminder of the volatile nature of these proceedings. You have disrupted centuries of tradition, human, Elder Kyr Tax announced, their ancient voice carrying despite its softness. Our species has survived by trusting no one outside our own. Yet here you stand, endorsed by a guardian of the first rank. Vorkath, now fully recovered, stood at Samira's side. Zyra, growing rapidly, remained nestled in a carrying sling across their chest. The human proved herself worthy, Vorkath stated firmly. She demonstrated strength beyond physical power. The council shifted, scales rustling like leather against their ceremonial armor. Then let her prove this strength again, Elder Mir Cash suggested, silver eyes gleaming. The trial of trust awaits any who wish to be considered pack-kin. Samira straightened her spine. She had studied Nexari culture extensively since the Medical Bay incident, but the trial of trust was mentioned only in whispered rumors. I accept, she said before Vorkath could protest. The trial began at dawn the next day. Samira found herself deep within the Nexari's ancestral training grounds, a massive biodome that recreated their species' original jungle habitat. The air was thick with moisture, and massive trees towered overhead, their phosphorescent bark providing the only illumination. The trial has 3 parts, Elder Kyr Tax explained. First, you must earn the trust of a wild Kubrix, a creature that has never known captivity or kindness. Then, you must protect a clutch of eggs from natural predators. Finally, you must demonstrate your understanding of our most sacred traditions. The Kubrix was a fearsome sight. Similar to Earth's extinct terror birds, it stood nearly as tall as a Nexari adult, with razor-sharp talons and a hooked beak that could crush bone. Its feathers shimmered with bioluminescent patterns, a warning to potential threats. Rather than approaching directly, Samira spent hours observing the creature's behavior. She noticed how it marked its territory, its feeding patterns, and most importantly, its distress signals. When she finally moved closer, she carried no weapons, no technology, only her understanding and patience. The Kubrix charged her repeatedly, but Samira held her ground each time, mimicking the submissive postures she'd observed in younger birds. On the 3rd day, exhausted but determined, she found herself eye to eye with the magnificent creature. The Kubrix lowered its massive head, allowing her to touch its feathered crest, a sign of acceptance that drew murmurs of approval from the watching council. The second trial proved even more challenging. The clutch of eggs she was assigned to protect belonged to a mated pair of spinewings, flying predators that made Earth's eagles look tame. For 5 days and nights, Samira defended the nest against wave after wave of egg-stealing creatures. She used her knowledge of behavioral biology to anticipate attacks, setting up natural deterrents and even recruiting the Kubrix she had befriended to help guard the clutch. When the eggs finally hatched, the spine-wing parents returned to find their offspring not only safe but thriving. To everyone's amazement, they allowed Samira to approach the chicks, a privilege normally reserved for their own kind. The final trial, however, was purely cultural. Samira was presented with a series of complex social scenarios, each testing her understanding of Nexary honor, family bonds, and pack dynamics. She drew upon everything she had learned from Vorkath and her research, navigating the intricate web of Nexary traditions with careful consideration. In this scenario, why did you choose to challenge the dominant warrior rather than accept their authority? Elder Mirkash demanded after one particularly tense simulation. Because they were wrong, Samira replied firmly. Nexary tradition values strength, yes, but strength in service of protecting the pack. The dominant warrior was acting for personal glory, risking the cub's safety. No tradition should supersede the protection of the young. A heavy silence fell over the chamber. Then, incredibly, Elder Kyrtax began to laugh, a rolling, thunderous sound that seemed to shake the very trees. Perhaps, they said, we have finally found a species worthy of trust, not because they match our strength, but because they understand its true purpose. The council's decision was unprecedented. Samira was granted the title of Karthal, Guardian of the Path. She would serve as a bridge between their species, teaching other humans how to earn the trust of the galaxy's deadliest predators while helping the Nexary understand that physical might was not the only measure of worth. As she stood with Vorkath afterward, watching Zyra play with the spine-wing chicks under their parents' watchful eyes, Samira realized that trust, like any living thing, needed the right conditions to grow. We're not so different, she mused. Humans Nexary. We're all trying to protect what matters most. Vorkath rumbled in agreement. Different methods, same heart, they said. Perhaps that is why the cubs trust you so easily. They see past the differences to what truly matters. The success of the trials marked a turning point in human Nexary relations. Other stations began requesting cultural exchange programs, and young Nexary warriors sought out human mentors to learn different approaches to problem-solving. But more importantly, it opened the door for cooperation with other predatory species who had been watching these developments with growing interest. The galaxy was changing, one small trust at a time. The Crothy incident. The peace that had settled over Helios Station was shattered by the arrival of the Crothy Warfleet. Like living shadows, their biomechanical ships slid into orbit around the station, their hulls rippling with patterns of bioluminescent threat displays. The Crothy were nomadic hunters, cybernetically enhanced predators who saw other species as either prey or competition. Dr. Samira Hassan stood in the station's command center, her newly earned Nexary ceremonial armor gleaming under the emergency lights. Beside her, Vorkath's scales had darkened to combat black, while Zyra and the other cubs had been moved to the station's secure central hub. They're demanding we surrender all non-Karate young, Station Commander Dahlia Rodriguez reported, her face grim. They claim it's their right as the superior predatory species. Superior? Vorkath's translator crackled with barely contained rage. They are scavengers who enhance themselves with stolen technology. They understand nothing of true strength. The main screen flickered to life, revealing the Crothy Huntmaster. Their cybernetic eyes glowed an unnatural red, and metal implants protruded from their scaled skin. We have studied your station, they hissed. You harbor the young of multiple species. Such diversity is weakness. Under Crothy guidance, they will become strong. Resist, and we will take them by force. Samira stepped forward, her mind racing. The Crothy were notorious for raising stolen cubs as their own, indoctrinating them into their brutal culture. Huntmaster, she said carefully, I am Karthal of the Nexary. By their laws and traditions, I speak for all young ones under our protection. The Huntmaster's cybernetic eyes whirred as they focused on her. A human? Speaking for predator young? Your station's corruption runs deeper than we thought. I earned this right, Samira declared, as the Crothy earned their cybernetic enhancements through trial and proof of worth. Would you deny the validity of such trials? This gave the Huntmaster pause. Crothy culture was built around proving oneself worthy of enhancements. Denying the validity of trials would undermine their own societal structure. "We challenge your worth," the Huntmaster finally declared. "Face our champions in combat. Prove your right to protect these young." Before Samira could respond, Vorkath stepped forward. "The human strength is not in combat," they rumbled. "Her power lies in understanding, in healing, in bringing together those who would be enemies. I have seen her tame a wild Kubrix, earn the trust of Spinewings, and unite predator and prey in common cause. Then let her prove this supposed power," the Huntmaster sneered. "We will send our most aggressive, uncontrolled young one. If she can tame it without technology, without force, we will reconsider our position." The challenge was set. Hours later, Samira found herself in one of the station's larger cargo bays, converted into a controlled environment for the trial. The crothy youth they brought was barely adolescent, but already augmented with basic cybernetics. Its organic eyes were wild with fear and aggression, its movements jerky and uncontrolled. "The enhancements are rejecting," Samira muttered, her medical training kicking in. "They implanted them too early, before the body was ready. It's in pain." The young Crothy charged, its cybernetic limbs giving it unnatural speed. Instead of dodging, Samira held her ground, remembering her lessons with the Kubrix. She kept her posture open, non-threatening, even as razor-sharp claws stopped inches from her throat. "I know you're hurting," she said softly. "The implants burn, don't they? Your body's fighting them. But you're fighting too, trying to prove you're strong enough, worthy enough." The young Crothy froze, organic eyes widening. No one had acknowledged its pain before. "I can help," Samira continued, slowly reaching out. "Not by changing you, but by healing what's already there. You don't need to be enhanced to be worthy." For the next several hours, Samira worked with the young Crothy, demonstrating exercises to help its organic body adapt to the implants, showing it how to move naturally instead of fighting its own enhancements. Gradually, the wild look in its eyes faded, replaced by cautious curiosity. The watching Crothy were silent, but their body language showed their shock when their young one willingly sat with Samira, allowing her to examine its implants without restraints. "The human speaks truth," the young Crothy announced, its voice steady for the first time. "She brings no weakness, but understanding. My implants no longer burn." The Huntmaster's expression was unreadable, their cybernetic eyes whirring as they processed this development. "Perhaps we have misunderstood the nature of strength," they admitted reluctantly. "Our young ones suffer in their early enhancements, yet we never considered there might be alternatives." What followed was unprecedented. The Crothy requested to establish a permanent presence on Helios Station, not as conquerors, but as students. They wanted to learn human medical techniques, to understand how to better prepare their young for enhancement, and most surprisingly, to learn when enhancement might not be necessary at all. Samira found herself leading an unlikely coalition. Nexari warriors began working with Crothy engineers, combining their understanding of natural hunting techniques with cybernetic optimization. The station's medical bay expanded to include specialists in both organic and cybernetic medicine. "You've changed them," Vorkath observed one evening, watching Zyra play with the young Crothy, who now moved with fluid grace instead of jerky aggression. "Changed us all." "No," Samira corrected, smiling as she saw human, Nexari, and Crothy medical students working together nearby. "I just showed everyone what was already there. The potential for understanding, for growth, for trust. Sometimes the strongest bonds come from recognizing our differences as strengths rather than weaknesses." The Crothy incident marked a turning point in galactic relations. Other species began to see that humanity's weakness, their adaptability and willingness to understand rather than dominate, was perhaps the greatest strength of all. Bridge between worlds. 6 months after the Crothy incident, Helios Station had transformed beyond recognition. What began as a simple research outpost had evolved into the galaxy's first true interspecies sanctuary. The station's central hub, once filled with sterile laboratories and meeting rooms, now housed the Stellar Nursery, a revolutionary facility designed to care for young ones from every spacefaring species. Dr. Samira Hassan stood in the nursery's observation dome, watching the remarkable scene below. Nexari cubs played an intricate stalking game with young Crothy, their movements a perfect blend of natural grace and augmented precision. In a temperature-controlled pool, aquatic meridian hatchlings swam alongside human children, their bioluminescent patterns flashing in synchronized joy. The Council of Elders still cannot quite believe what they're seeing, Vorkath commented, approaching with Zyra perched on their shoulders. The once tiny cub had grown considerably, their scales now shimmering with the deep blues of adolescence. Sometimes I can't believe it either, Samira admitted. A year ago, most of these species wouldn't even share the same space station. Now look at them. The nursery's success had sparked a revolution in interstellar relations. Species that had evolved as predators and prey were learning to coexist, their young ones leading the way. The key, Samira had discovered, was starting early, before ancient prejudices and instinctive fears could take root. Guardian Hassan, a young Krothi apprentice called, hurrying over. Like many of the newer generation, they wore minimal enhancements, choosing to develop their natural abilities first. The first clutch of Syraxian eggs is beginning to hatch. The Syraxians were the latest species to join their growing community. Ancient rivals of the Krothi, they were silicon-based life forms whose young emerged from crystalline eggs. Their decision to entrust their eggs to the nursery had been controversial, but the success with other species had convinced them to try. Samira hurried to the incubation chamber, followed by an eager crowd of children from various species. The Syraxian eggs pulsed with internal light, their crystalline shells becoming increasingly transparent. Through the shells, they could see the infant forms unfurling like living origami. Everyone remember what we discussed, Samira reminded the watching children. Syraxian hatchlings are very sensitive to emotional energy. They need to feel safe and welcome. The young ones needed no further instruction. Human children began humming a soft welcome song they'd composed specially for this moment. Nexary cubs added their own rumbling purrs, while Krothi youth generated low-frequency vibrations with their cybernetic vocal enhancers. The combined effect created a harmonious resonance that seemed to encourage the hatchlings. One by one, the crystalline eggs dissolved, revealing iridescent Syraxian infants. Their faceted bodies caught the light, sending rainbow patterns dancing across the chamber walls. To everyone's amazement, the hatchlings immediately began mimicking the welcome song, their bodies chiming like crystal wind chimes. "They're not afraid," the Syraxian ambassador whispered, their own crystalline form vibrating with emotion. "In all our history, our hatchlings have emerged ready to defend themselves. But these, they feel no need for defense." The success of the hatching marked another milestone. Word spread quickly through the galactic community. If the predatory Krothi and the crystalline Syraxians could raise their young together, anything was possible. The nursery expanded to include specialized environments for every conceivable species. Under Samira's guidance, they developed new protocols for cross-species care and education. Young ones learned not just about their own species' strengths, but how to appreciate and complement the abilities of others. Zyra, now serving as a junior caregiver, proved particularly adept at bridging cultural gaps. "It's because they grew up with this," Vorkath observed proudly. To them, diversity isn't just normal, it's essential. The impact extended far beyond childcare. Adult representatives from various species began requesting to observe the nursery's methods, hoping to apply similar principles to diplomatic relations. The station established the Interstellar Cultural Exchange Program, where adults could learn the same lessons of trust and cooperation that came so naturally to their young. One evening, as Samira was completing her daily reports, she received an unexpected visitor. The Krothi huntmaster, who had once threatened to take their young by force, stood in her office doorway. Their cybernetic enhancements had been significantly reduced, allowing more of their natural features to show. "We have been watching," they said without preamble. "Our enhanced young ones who interact with other species here, they develop better control, stronger abilities, clearer minds. By forcing early enhancement, we were weakening ourselves, not strengthening." Samira nodded, understanding the cost of this admission in Krothi culture. "Strength comes in many forms," she said. "Sometimes the strongest choice is to wait, to learn, to grow naturally." "The human way," the huntmaster mused. "Perhaps not so weak after all." The conversation was interrupted by a commotion from the nursery, laughter, trills, and the crystalline chiming of excited Syraxian young ones. They looked out to see Zyra leading a group of mixed-species children in a new game, one that combined Nexary hunting techniques with Crothy precision challenges and Syraxian harmony patterns. "This is the future," Samira said softly. "Not species learning to tolerate each other, but truly understanding and celebrating their differences. These children will grow up knowing that diversity makes us all stronger." The Huntmaster was quiet for a long moment. "We have requested permission to build similar nurseries in Crothy space," they finally said. "Our council believes this may be the evolution we have been seeking. Legacy of compassion." The warning came without prelude, a massive quantum surge heading straight for the Helios sector. The phenomenon, unprecedented in recorded history, threatened to disrupt the neural patterns of every living being in its path. Young ones, with their still developing neural networks, would be the most vulnerable. In the station's emergency command center, Dr. Samira Hassan faced representatives from 24 species. The quantum surge would hit in less than 48 hours, and evacuation wasn't possible. The disruption would affect ships' navigation systems, making safe, faster-than-light travel impossible. "Our shielding technology can protect approximately 30% of the station's population," Commander Rodriguez reported grimly. "We need to decide dash. The young ones take priority," multiple voices said simultaneously. Nexary, Crothy, Syraxian, human, all spoke as one, without hesitation. "The protected sections won't have room for adult caregivers," Samira pointed out, her heart heavy. "The children would be alone." "Not alone," Vorkath stepped forward, their scales shifting to deep purple, the color of absolute certainty. "The human young ones. Their neural plasticity, their adaptive capabilities, they're more resilient than our cubs. They could help care for the others." The Crothy Huntmaster nodded, their cybernetic eyes glowing with rare warmth. "Our scans confirm this. Human children's brains adapt more quickly to neural stress. With minimal shielding, they could survive and help maintain order among the other young." The implications were staggering. Every species present would have to trust human children, some as young as 10, to protect and care for their precious young ones during the crisis. A decade ago, the very suggestion would have been met with violence. "I volunteer," Zyra announced, now a striking adolescent Nexary. "I was raised by human care. I can help bridge the gap between human caregivers and other species young." The next 40 hours were a blur of activity. The station's most shielded sections were converted into massive nurseries, equipped with environmental controls for every species. Human children were given crash courses in basic care for different species, their young minds absorbing the information with remarkable speed. Samira worked tirelessly, preparing both adults and children for what was to come. The human children showed extraordinary courage, understanding the weight of responsibility being placed on them. Many were scared, but none backed down. When the time came, over 300 young ones from 24 species were secured in the shielded sections. 40 human children, led by 15-year-old Arya-chan, would serve as their primary caregivers. Zyra and a handful of other older alien young ones would assist, protected by modified Crothy neural dampeners. "Remember your training," Samira told the human children in their final briefing. "Each species' young ones have different needs, but they all need the same basic things: safety, comfort, and understanding. You can do this." The surge hit with devastating force. Outside the shielded areas, adults of all species struggled to maintain consciousness as their neural patterns were disrupted. The station's systems flickered, stabilized only by the Crothy's cybernetic interfaces and Syraxian crystalline technology. Inside the nursery, something remarkable happened. As the first waves of neural disruption reached them, the human children began singing simple, soothing songs they had learned from various species. The Nexary cubs, initially agitated, began purring in harmony. Syraxian young ones added their crystalline tones, while Crothy youth contributed deep, rhythmic pulses. The combined frequencies created an unexpected effect, a natural neural stabilization field that helped protect everyone within range. The children had instinctively created what advanced technology couldn't, a collaborative defense against the surge. For 72 hours, the human children worked in shifts, maintaining order among hundreds of alien young ones. They handled everything from feeding times to emotional crises, drawing on their training and their natural ability to adapt and empathize. Zyra moved between groups, her presence reassuring young ones who had never been separated from their parents before. When the surge finally passed, the adults rushed to the nursery, unsure what they would find. They discovered all the young ones not just safe, but thriving. Human children had organized the space into specialized care zones, created new games that incorporated different species' needs, and even developed improved communication methods between species that normally couldn't interact. "It's beautiful," Samira whispered, watching a human girl demonstrate to a group of Syraxian young ones how to modulate their crystalline tones to communicate with Nexari cubs. They didn't just survive, they created something entirely new. The Surge incident became a turning point in galactic history. The sight of human children successfully protecting and nurturing the young of apex predators and ancient spacefaring races fundamentally changed how humanity was viewed in the galaxy. The Helios nursery model was adapted across known space. Mixed species education became the norm rather than the exception. The human capacity for adaptation and empathy, once seen as a weakness, was recognized as perhaps the most valuable trait a spacefaring species could possess. Years later, Samira stood in the vastly expanded Helios station, watching graduates of that first crisis nursery take their places as leaders in the galactic community. Zyra had become the first non-human head of the Interstellar Cultural Exchange Program. Human children who had served as emergency caregivers grew into respected xenobiologists, diplomats, and teachers. "Did you ever imagine it would come to this?" Vorkath asked, their scales now bearing the silver sheen of a respected elder. "When you first treated that injured guardian and cub?" Samira smiled, watching a new generation of mixed species young ones play together in the station's central garden. "I hoped," she said, "but the reality is better than anything I could have imagined. We didn't just earn trust. We created a whole new way of seeing strength." In the end, humanity's greatest contribution to galactic society wasn't technology or military might. It was the simple yet profound demonstration that true strength lies not in dominance, but in the ability to care, to adapt, and to bring out the best in others. The predators had learned to trust, the prey had learned to stand tall, and together, they had built something greater than any single species could have achieved alone. The legacy of compassion would echo through the stars for generations to come.